everyone. Hi, welcome again and to our session on hiring and onboarding remotely during a pandemic. Apologies to anyone who was here about 5 minutes ago where I started presenting and then realized that I wasn't actually presenting. So if you've already heard this, you can feel free to take a 5-minute nap. I'm Erin Gallagher, the Chair of Acquisitions and Collection Services at the University of Florida Libraries, and I am also joined virtually. I am here in person in Charleston. I'm joined virtually by Jason Heckathorn, our Collection Support Manager, who is also going to be co-presenting with me today from Gainesville. Now, you have been through several hybrid sessions at this point. I think we got it worked out. Thank you. You've been through several hybrid sessions at this point, and you have seen the technical hiccups and the things that can possibly go wrong. So thank you in advance for your care and understanding and grace as we navigate these uncharted waters. Particularly thanks to my in-person attendees here who have already heard me say all of these things once. So due to our hybrid model here, and because this is meant to be a lively discussion, we're not just going to talk at you for an hour. We are going to present a bit about what we've done at University of Florida, and then we're going to open this up for the lively discussion, and we're going to be using an interactive audience response tool called Mentimeter, and this has been used for other presentations this year. I think this is like a really hot new thing, and so if you have seen it, then you know how it works, but it's just going to require you to go to a website and anonymously enter responses that will then pop up for us on the screen, and you will not at all be identified, or there's no way that anyone will know how you have responded. And we really do hope that this is going to be a lively discussion, of course. All right. Let's talk about University of Florida again. So UF is a large Research One institution in Gainesville, Florida. Gainesville is in the north central part of the state, and it was built on a swamp. So the photo that you are seeing is a photo of the Paynes Prairie Preserve, which is technically a swamp. It's absolutely beautiful and is filled with alligators. So if you come to Gainesville, I highly recommend that you give it a visit. The University of Florida supports around 50,000 students, and that's anywhere from undergrad to PhD. We support a variety of degree programs from medicine to veterinary medicine to law to theater. I mean, almost anything you can think of, we've got it. The George A. Smathers Library system comprises a pretty large geographical footprint over the space that the University of Florida takes up in our city. We have 7 branch libraries and over 90 faculty librarians, over 200 professional staff, and around 325 student employees at the moment. So it's a really very large institution supporting a lot of employees. The department where Jason and I work is the Acquisitions and Collection Services Department. You could think of it as sort of traditional tech services. We are responsible for buying things and making them findable for the libraries. We have around 15 staff and librarians in our department, and we are organized into 3 functional units. One is accounting and serials, one is collection support, and one is electronic resources. Now, in March of 2020, when the world fell out from under our feet, as I'm sure many of you experienced, we were required to start working remotely and to not come into our offices anymore. And we had a couple of exceptions because book shipments and things were still coming in. We did have a handful of staff in our department who went in 1 or 2 days a week to help with shipments. But other than that, we were working entirely from home. And this also coincided with a hiring freeze at the University of Florida. So the vacant positions that we had at this time were really up in the air, and we had no idea when or if they were going to be filled anytime soon. Now, when we went remotely, we had 3 vacant positions, 3 vacant staff positions. And as I said, we had no idea what the future of those were going to look like. But some success. So between March 2020 and November 2021, today, we had a heck of a lot of flux in the department. We had 3 people depart. And by depart, I don't mean that they, went into space. I mean that they found other positions elsewhere in the libraries or somewhere else. We had one staff member retire. We had one staff member reclassified into another position, and we hired 4 staff members as well. So we had a lot of activity during that time. And we were able to successfully hire and onboard those folks during that time. So how did we do this? What were the logistics? And for this piece, I'm going to pass the baton over to Jason.
Thank you much, Erin, and good afternoon, folks in Charleston and folks online. And very quickly before I jump into that, just kudos to you, Erin, for handling all those tech issues. I'd ask for a round of applause, but I fear that would overwhelm the system here, so I don't want to do that. So how did we manage this? And so I'll go into a little bit of the weeds here, the swampy weeds, if you will, to play with that imagery. But so the leadership of the department is comprised of 3 unit managers and the chair of the department. And so these folks, including myself, have standing meetings once every 2 weeks. We have a lot of pop-up meetings in between these times. We have several functional meetings in the department, but these meeting times for the managers to meet are naturally times for the leadership to strategize and make decisions. And so when we were faced with the first hiring necessity, and if I recall correctly, that happened in my unit. And this came at a time when we had moved to remote work. We began to approach it just as if we would had in non-pandemic times, and then we're quickly confronted with the reality that we were going to have to make major adjustments, just like we had made major adjustments to everything else. And so the tools that we used are the ones that are familiar to a great many of you. That was the use of Microsoft Teams. That was Zoom. We made use of Outlook calendaring. We are a Microsoft institution. And so we were a bit fortunate, if you want to call it that we had already been actively exploring the use of Microsoft Teams prior to remote work. It was a component of our Microsoft ecosystem that had just been added. And then our hand was forced, or we were, the need to kind of accelerate that development was made all the more important with the move to remote work. So as a result, we relied a lot more heavily on Teams, and we were very intentional about creating these little pockets, the use of channels and whatnot to mirror many of the conversations that we would have in the department. We're a very active, collaborative. We genuinely enjoy working with one another. And so we wanted to maintain a lot of the aspects of the hallway conversations and the pop-ins to one another's offices. And so our use of Zoom was to help facilitate these types of meetings. And then we also very much use Zoom for all of our interviewing. So right from the outset with our phone interviewing, with our reference interviewing, we used Zoom's call-in feature to do so, restricting it to non-video usage. And for our on-site interviews, we used Zoom. And so, and then I'll spend a moment here just talking about the people. So we use this this imagery of free falling, and you can also use this imagery of kind of building the plane as you are going along. And so when you do that, there are no passive members of that crew. And so HR was very much involved. They like us were figuring things out on the fly, and our senior leadership, so our associate dean and others, and our most crucially, the members of the department were kind of brought in from the outset to make sure that we had their involvement. So that's I'm jumping ahead of myself, but that's a lesson learned and something that's been a real plus in the culture that we're building in the department is how active the department is as a whole. And so some of the unique challenges that we faced, although unique to us at the time, unlikely to be unique to many at y'all's institutions, but was quite simply the size of our institution. And so it was incredibly competitive to fill these vacant positions. Erin mentioned this hiring freeze. And so once this hiring freeze was lifted, there was obviously competition amongst folks within the libraries and truthfully on campus to fill these vacant positions. And One of the other concerns that we had with this hiring process was just the equity of it. We wanted to make sure that just because we had been so well supported by our IT folks, our IT team, in terms of loaning out computers, making known areas where to get low-cost computers, and all sorts of vouchers for internet and things of the like, and making sure that our folks are as well supported as we can be. You want to make sure that the folks that are interviewing are afforded much of the same opportunities. And so we one novel thing that we did to ensure that we had equity in this process was to extend invitations to those who interviewed virtually but were afforded the opportunity to come on campus and make use of our spaces and our technology to ensure that there weren't any unforeseen tech issues, Wi-Fi and the like. So and so those are challenges with the hard tech. And then there's also the challenges with what I call kind of soft tech. So these are kind of those technical hiccups, the not knowing whether or not folks are muted, and you're always asking, and am I muted? Can folks see me? Can folks see the slides, and things of the like that we still, that issues that persist to this day. And but more importantly was this absence of all the body language and the cues that you would just so naturally get in person, and knowing when to rejoin the conversation and add to it in a very organic way that is infinitely more difficult to do so when you are in the Hollywood Squares environment. And and then we also just, we had inconsistencies in communication. So, we're talking about, it's difficult to document when you're building the plane or when you're free falling. And we were not alone. Our HR department and others in the libraries were receiving, if not contradictory information, folks were receiving information that was kind of being developed on the fly. And so it was really necessary that we in the department, given that we had a lot of overlapping searches as well, it was really, it was integral to make sure that we were kind of coordinating with one another to kind of account for these differences for hiring folks at different levels. And so this naturally led to the just a kind of ongoing departmental goal amongst the leadership and folks in the department to just kind of cultivate this unity and this teamwork with onboarding. And so it's a discussion topic that persisted through a great many of these managers meetings, was just how to cultivate this or how to convey this culture and this community of teamwork. Apologies, one moment. When folks can't meet in person, and when they can't work together in person. And so the grabbing of coffee and the walking to and from meetings and all these naturally organic conversations, it can be really difficult to convey this sense of unity and connectedness. And so naturally, all these challenges are opportunities in disguise. And so naturally, you have this increased involvement amongst the managers prior to remote work. Strangely enough, a lot of our hiring practices and this whole process was kind of siloed amongst managers, and at most managers would be referred, but a lot of this was just happening within the individual units, and so there was just a lot more standardization. We've really learned a lot of lessons on the length and the format of these interviews. I think we had kind of fallen in a trap, the very natural, easy to fall into trap of kind of sticking with tried and true methods and the schedule that you have. And you kind of just, in some ways you kind of just copy and paste from one to the other. And so, we were kind of forced to consider, is this truly best for the folks participating in the interview process, including the folks who are interviewing themselves. We really moved towards developing and sharing a lot of the interview materials themselves with folks in the department. So we disseminated all the application materials very much ahead of time, and kind of developed questions and topics that we wanted to address. And so everything I'm citing here is indicative of just the increased collaboration that we had amongst the leadership and the staff. And so we truly had engagement from every member of the department, and then had these kind of naturally occurring instances of kind of folks genuinely enjoying this process and kind of rising to increased participation. So we had in fact, we had one of our newest members of the department added to our existing body of documentation with regards to onboarding, so that the lessons most recently learned can be impressed upon future hires. And so, and selfishly, the hiring managers themselves, by this increased participation, were able to facilitate these rather than just kind of ferry folks from one session to the next. I'll turn it back over to you, Erin.
Great, thanks, Jason. So where do we go from here? We are currently under a hybrid work offering at the University of Florida with no plans to change this for the foreseeable future. And by that, I mean that we are being offered 2 days a week remote and then 3 days a week on campus in our offices. This is probably similar to how many people have transitioned back to the on-site environment at your own libraries or organizations. And I can say that among the employees in our, the staff and librarians in our department, most people are taking advantage of this. And I think you can guess the 2 days of the week that most people are taking remotely. That would be Monday and Friday. Although there are some staff who have chosen to come in every day and work, on-site every day. And we don't see this changing. We know that this is still going to be offered to us in the spring semester. However, the caveat is that newly hired employees are required to work their first 90 days entirely on campus before being offered the hybrid remote work situation. So that's something new to navigate. We've also returned to fully on-site. By that, I mean like a human being on-site in our libraries interviewing, but with increased safety precautions now, we're rethinking the spaces that we use for interviews to allow for more distancing, and also building in more breaks so that people can get over mask fatigue. You know how it is to be masked up for an entire day and, talking constantly. And librarians tend to be a crowd of people who wear a lot of glasses, and you know how that can get fogged up really, really quickly. So we're trying to allow our on-site interviewees to be as comfortable as possible. We do have plans to try to foster the success of our interviewees even more through things like potentially sending interview questions ahead of time. This is something that we're considering and planning to implement just to see how it goes and see if it really helps with that sense of not only are you stressed about on-site interviewing during a pandemic, but now you are ambushed by unexpected questions. We're also going to continue to make use of Qualtrics, which is a survey tool that the University of Florida licenses to gauge feedback from our department staff on folks who have interviewed, candidates who have interviewed in person. And I can thank Jason for implementing this, because what it means is that we're getting a lot more feedback from our department staff and librarians on on-site candidates, because they're able to submit feedback anonymously through Qualtrics instead of asking them to, send an email or write up a document or something. It's a quick and low impact way for us to get feedback, and it's been really successful. And we just plan on keeping up with our documentation. We want to plump it up even more. We have really help to streamline this process just through things like, what are the standard emails that we send to candidates? What are the standard emails we send to folks who we're going to ask to view references? We don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So let's crowdsource this and create documentation that we can reuse so that this process is quicker and easier each time. And then we won't plan on also keeping up the increased leadership among our leadership team, or the communication among our leadership team, because it has been really rewarding and fulfilling. And I think it's made us even closer as a team. All right, so we have like standing room only here in person, y'all. I don't know what's going on Zoom, but it is just a huge, huge crowd here. It's quality over quantity. That's what I said earlier. So lively discussion. I ask attendees virtually or in person. If you in person, you have the option, it's easier for you to, I think, interject and I can repeat your questions into the microphone for our virtual attendees. But virtual or in person, if you go to menti.com, in just a moment, I'm going to start sharing the Menti questions, and what you will see is an 8-digit code that you will enter into the little text box in Menti, and then once you enter it, and once I start the presentation, you'll see questions pop up, and then you can enter your answers in the text box, and they should start popping up for us on the screen here. So if you want to talk amongst yourselves for 2 seconds while I figure out how to switch over to Menti. Actually, while I do that, are there any questions or comments that have come through in the chats? Sounds like that's a no. All right.
There is
Oh, you can? All
There
right.
actually are 2 questions that I'm seeing in Pathable.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one is just a comment. We've been sending interview questions ahead of time, and it's been a huge success. Great feedback from candidates and more thoughtful, complete answers. But then the question is, I'm curious to hear more about the 90-day on-site requirement. Where does that come from? Is it campus level, library admin, etc.?
That's a very good question. That has absolutely come from it's come from admin. I am not sure if it was library admin or UF-wide admin. Jason, are you aware of that?
I believe it was an opportunity extended to folks beyond just the libraries, but the library certainly wanted to make use of that. And it is for that very reason why it persists, to this day, because of the value add that it's been for everyone involved. I mean, I think from the outset, it was about having staggering, especially for our frontline folks and folks that are in more of shared office spaces, which we have kind of distributed amongst the libraries. It was a means to kind of accommodate that, but has really kind of extended to a better, I think, balance for a great many folks. It's a good benefit for those that wish to take advantage of it.
Thanks, Jason. My impression was also that as much as it is a controversial policy, because it is a little bit hard to manage the message with new employees that, hey, you're going to be offered this hybrid work situation, but not for 90 days. And I know that that is a big selling point for hiring right now, is that people really want to be able to get into some sort of a hybrid opportunity. But I also see the positive side of this is that how hard it is. I won't say if you know how hard it is to onboard someone entirely remotely, and just to get them up to speed on not only the job, but what the culture and the sort of ecology of your department and your library and your institution is like, that is a real challenge. And so if they have the opportunity to have a 90-day on-site sort of blitz of onboarding in person, I do think that will help convey some of those fuzzier pieces that can't really be conveyed remotely. All right, so I was going to ask if folks can see Menti, but you obviously can because you are responding. Can virtual folks see the responses? Jason or Nitra?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Awesome. Great. All right, so I started with a, sort of softball icebreaker question of where are you located today? And so we have people from all over the place. Oh, we got a Gainesville, go Gators. That can't be Jason. I don't know if that's Jason or not, but wonderful.
It is not.
Okay. All right. Next. All right, so this question probably should have been asked first. What do you hope to gain from this lively discussion? While you're responding, I wanted to mention something that I forgot to mention in both takes, both my practice run that some people saw and my real run, which is the title of our presentation, Free Falling, has sort of double entendre, because not only did we feel like we were free falling, but Tom Petty is a beloved son of Gainesville, and so we were doing a little play on one of his most famous tunes there. right? So people want to get a sense of how others are managing and coping, making candidates feel supported and welcome, where things went wrong. Okay, challenges and creative ideas, tips for onboarding. Well, luckily Jason already covered all of this in what he spoke about just a few minutes ago. No, but these are concerns that, I mean, we still share a lot of these concerns. We still, I wouldn't say struggle, but we strive to make new employees feel very welcome. And this was a major challenge when we were doing this entirely remotely. We've been back in our offices in some capacity, I'd say since around the end of June, early July, when our second summer class session started. And so we have hired and onboarded some employees during that time. And in person, you know what it's like, you know what to expect. But remotely, it was really, like Jason said, building the plane as we flew. And so we tried very hard to replicate that sense of welcome, celebration. Hey, it's your first day. Normally we would have had bagels and coffee for you, but instead we're going to be on a Teams channel, trying to, convey that same sense of celebration. And whether or not that was successful is something that we are still determining. So I realize that it's not easy to have a lively discussion when so many people are remote and unable to speak up with their voices, but are there comments in the chat in regard to this question?
There are not, Erin, but it's great to see some consistency amongst the comments.
I can see the chat. I'm sorry, I just got really excited because I realized I can actually see the chat. But if I do this, then it will hide the Menti responses.
I see. Well, we do have a question. Have you done training of new hires in a hybrid environment? Any recommendations for success? Anything to avoid? And we have. In fact, with Erin mentioning the folks that we've kind of the movement that we've had within the department, we actually cycled a staff member in who then moved on to a great opportunity, all at this remote time. And there are certainly several recommendations for success. So we've it's the tools and strategies that we've mentioned before, but I think right from the outset is kind of celebrating the small wins. In the first couple of days, the first week, the kind of the small measurable successes that a new staff member has made. Not overly, not over the top about it, but celebrate those little small accomplishments, because to note how those contributions are made towards the department, that they're not kind of in vain. But there are certainly challenges. I certainly recall being on site and meeting on my phone to kind of convey a sense of space. So there were certainly a great number of challenges. And we have another question here. Have you found it difficult to keep your new hires engaged in your hybrid environment? And Erin, do you want to tackle that question?
Yeah, so I'll tackle that and a bit of the previous question. I have not found that it has, from my perspective, it does not seem as though it is hard to have our new hires engaged. In fact, they seem even more engaged and more eager to be sort of on all day than they may have in an in-person or on-site onboarding situation. Imagine your first day at a new job, and ideally what you're getting is a lot of support. You're meeting people, you're getting a sense of space, you're starting to feel comfortable, but you're also left alone for a little while because you need that time to just set up your email and make sure that you have access to the things that you need to have access to, and make sure that you can kind of breathe and have a moment to yourself. And so we tried to replicate that in the virtual environment by setting aside an hour or so a day in that first couple of weeks to allow the new employees, new hires to explore and take time on their own to dig into the things that we had been training them on or showing them, especially in those first intensive couple week periods. And this dovetails into the previous question, which Jason answered very well. I'll say that as far as training, one thing I failed to mention is that not only were we all working remotely, for the past year and a half, but we were in the midst of a massive statewide systems migration as well. The entire Florida college and university system migrated to Alma Primo, and we just went live on July 13th. So we were managing the ins and outs of a massive systems migration while remote, while onboarding and hiring new employees. And so really a lot of what we focused on when new employees came on board was what's the best way to get them up to speed and get them sort of on the same level as others who have already been undergoing Alma or Primo trainings. So we had pretty clearly set training videos and series and tutorials offered by our systems provider that we got new employees started with right away. But of course, there's no substitute for just hands-on getting together in a training room together and walking through things in real time. And that was actually not so hard to replicate remotely, because even though we're not all physically in a room together, we could all, be in a Zoom room together, watching the same videos, walking through the same features and workflows and things. So that piece, even though very challenging, did lend itself fairly well to that remote environment. I think what we've been conveying is that the pieces that are much, much harder to convey are those softer cultural pieces. Just what is it like to interact with your employees? How do you get to know people? So we tried to build in some fun chats on Teams. We have a channel that someone, it might have been Jason, calls Coffee Clatch. And it's just a kind of, where we normally would have had coffee and maybe stand around in the hallway and talk about, hey, how are things going? Does anybody recommend a dog sitter or something? We're trying to sort of replicate that so that our new employees don't feel like all they're doing is watching training videos and staring at their email for 8 hours a day. All right, I'm moving to our next mentee question. Are you involved in hiring and onboarding new employees at your institution or organization?
Erin, while you're taking or while you're soliciting answers to that question, I'll take a couple questions from the chat. And so we have a question related to the, I should interrupt myself and say I cannot take credit for that coffee clutch. That was our former colleague, Trey Shelton.
Oh, that was our wonderful former colleague. Okay.
Yeah. And so we were asked if we had some sort of feedback process in place for new hires to tell about the onboarding experience. And so, yes, so we had a very naturally occurring, so we had we have 4 folks who've all come in within, let's say, 7 to 8 months of one another. So we have, due to the hiring freeze and bringing these folks on board, we kind of have a natural cohort of folks who have kind of leaned on one another as they're coming on board in their training. And so it is this very group that helped kind of feed the kind of iterative process. And so kind of going from interview to, or from the hiring and onboarding of these folks, each step was kind of made all the better by taking the immediate feedback from these folks. And these are the folks that we continue to kind of, we continue to solicit feedback from these folks, just because it's so relevant. I mean, what better group of folks to provide that feedback than ones who were successful, and we want to ensure that they're successful. So another question: have others found hybrid meetings to be much more difficult than pure Zoom? Any tips for engaging the room with Zoomers? I mean, wow. I mean, what better question than the format by which we're conducting this today? So it hits very close to home. Yeah, we, at least within the department, we've been very intentional about, hybrid meetings work in some capacity. And so, but I think we've left it up to individual units whether or not they have in-person meetings or if they're conducted virtually. But But on the whole, we don't have too many hybrid meetings just because we want to kind of lean very heavily one way or the other.
Well, and that's, not to interrupt, Jason.
Not at all. I'm sure you have more thoughts on it.
Okay, so even before, this pandemic hit, UF is a really, really big institution, and some of our branch libraries are a good long hike from where an in-person meeting might be held. And y'all know Florida is hot, and I mean, it's just like miserable mosquito swamp to be walking around in the heat back and forth between our branch libraries. So even before we went remote with the pandemic, we had hybrid meetings. Our library faculty assembly, for example, we would have a physical space and folks could feel free to be in that physical space. Or if you didn't feel like walking 2 miles across campus to get there, then you could join remotely. I did observe, and this is a personal observation, that those were very challenging meetings to navigate, and that the folks who were attending remotely often did perhaps feel a bit shortchanged in the fact that, sometimes we'd be having a spirited discussion and then realize, oh gosh, let's see what people have said remotely. And so they're sort of coming in on the, back end. Now within our department, during this pandemic, of course, all of our meetings were Zoom, were remote. Now that we're back in person, as Jason said, we're leaving it up to the units. So for example, the e-resources unit, we meet once a week as a standing unit meeting, and we are meeting in person because we decided collectively that we'd like to do that. Our department meetings, every 2 weeks, we meet as an entire department. Those are solely virtual at the moment, and that is in part due to just how rough things were going in Florida for such a long time over the past few months. We did not feel comfortable getting 15 people in a room together. But it was also in part because of our hybrid work situation. Now there's not one day of the week in which all employees are actually on campus together. So that means that at some point we might enact a hybrid option for those department meetings. So if you're here in person, you can attend in person. And if it's your remote work day, then you can attend remotely. I got to tell y'all that I do have concerns about this. My concerns are that for people who already feel comfortable speaking up in a department meeting, those people are perhaps going to feel even more comfortable, being there in person speaking up. And people who don't feel as comfortable speaking up, if they are virtual, will be even less likely to feel comfortable speaking up. So my concern is a inequity of engagement with our department meetings if we were to enact a hybrid model. Of course, that would be an option if that's what turns out to be best for us, but still something we're considering. All right, what are some successes or best bets you've discovered when hiring and onboarding employees remotely? This is where I'd really like us all to kind of share. We've had a lot of, like I said, a real flux in the makeup of our department over the past year and a half. But we want to learn from y'all too. We want to know, what sorts of things you all have been doing. I don't want to put anyone on the spot in the room, but I just want to make sure that my in-person attendees, if you do have anything to mention or ask, I can repeat it for you into the microphone.
But I had a question about what Jason answering about the feedback. Do you guys have like a formal process or questions that you ask when you onboardees, or is it just like organic and you get feedback from them?
Okay, great question. So this is our very own Brittany Kester from the University of Florida. And her question was, do we have a formal process, like a feedback form or something for our new employees in order for us to get feedback from them on the hiring and onboarding process? And the answer is that so far it's not formal. It's not an actual form or a survey or, a document. However, Jason did mention that one of our most recent hires, she's really wonderful, took it upon herself to create documentation for the benefit of future hires because we had such a tight-knit little cohort of people all being hired within like a month or so of each other. And so she really took the initiative to just sort of free form, these are the things that would have helped me to know or that I would like to impart on other new hires, but it wasn't a formal process. I can also say, personally from my experience in e-resources with a very recent hire, when we meet and, I'm meeting very frequently, like daily with a new hire, for example. And when I say meet, I don't mean, oh, we're going to talk about how to perform this task or how to do this function or show you this new system. I mean, we're going to sit down and talk to each other about, how are things going so far. So instead of those meetings being me conveying information to the new employee, I always try to build in time for what are the things that we haven't talked about that you still feel like you need clarification on. We do have onboarding checklists. So these questions are, what's not on this onboarding checklist that you still feel is unclear. We really cultivate a culture of asking questions in our department. One of my favorite, sayings is asking questions is a strength, not a weakness. And so we really try to let new employees know that we want to hear from them too. But no, the answer is it's not really formalized yet. Yep. Of course. Oh, I really like this, offering casual virtual opportunities to meet for coffee or drinks with peers. That's very key. Yes. I love that idea. Making sure they're with the appropriate people, cross library opportunities to welcome new staff. Okay, yes, that's something else. I'm so glad that you brought this up. When you're at an institution where you have multiple library branches, or you have departments and areas that are sort of spread out geographically, you don't have that organic opportunity of, oh, I'm walking in and out of the office, I'm walking to and from the break room or the restroom, and so I just kind of meet people and get to know people. And so we've tried to be more intentional when new employees come on board with, let's take a walking tour. And again, Florida weather makes this really hard in the summer. It quickly turns into like, I'm horribly uncomfortable and just need to get into some air conditioning. But we have tried to enrich that, sort of take a walk about, meet people at different branches as much as possible. New librarians start doing pandemic, let's recommend. Other units documentation, that's, yes, definitely share the wealth and set up ongoing meetings and check-ins, absolutely. Oh, I love this, someone's building a Canvas course to talk about the culture and values of their library. That's really nifty. Clear expectations. Yes, calendars and sharing availability. I'm so glad that someone mentioned this too. Yeah, that's kind of a day one for us, expectations, especially with, when you're working remotely. And I know that I felt like, when am I done working? Because my office is my home. So technically I could just be working 24 hours a day. And we certainly don't want any new employees to feel that they should be doing that. And I definitely wasn't doing that. All right, so how about some other challenges? One other thing that I'll mention is, Charleston is a conference that tends to be traditionally comprised of people who work in acquisitions or tech services, or sort of the back end, behind the scenes work. And that is definitely changing. I've been coming to Charleston for 10 years, and I find that every year it is more and more welcoming and conducive to people who are in public facing roles or in selector roles, or, instruction reference roles, because our work is inextricably linked, of course. But one thing that I noticed is that it was a bit easier for those of us in my department to transfer our day-to-day tasks to remote work environments than it was perhaps for our public-facing folks. And so I give a lot of credit to those of you who have managed to figure out how to do like reference and instruction and student engagement and that sort of thing remotely, because so much of what we were doing was already online and already, in electronic environments. Yeah, keeping new hires engagement, yes. All right, I want to see this one. Don't get comfortable. Yes. That's a really good point. Not getting comfortable out of your area as quickly. Yes, that's very true. It's hard to ask questions or for help asynchronously. Yes. That's why we have, right before we went remote, we were kind of toying with Teams, Microsoft Teams, and like, oh, is this a thing we're going to use? And I will admit that I was a bit of a naysayer at first because I thought, well, this is just yet another thing for me to check all day. And I already have my email popping up and I already have, you know, other forms of communication. So what is this other thing that I'm just going to have to check every 5 minutes? And it has turned out to be just such a wonderful boon for us to have that Teams chat ability. I can say with our e-resources team, for example, we are troubleshooting access issues collaboratively constantly, and Teams is wonderful for that. As a pandemic hire, it's hard to learn what I don't know about the organization because there are fewer casual conversations to reveal knowledge. That very good point, yes. And as much as I just touted the wonders of Teams for trying to replicate those conversations, it's just not, it's not the same. You know how it is where you text somebody and you're like, oh gosh, somehow that came across sounding really terse or like cranky, and you didn't mean to be terse and cranky at all, and somehow it just came across that way. Oh boy, sharing the load of on-site tasks. I so wish that we were all here in person because I have so many follow-ups I want to ask you all about these things. Oh, okay, yes. All right, so someone here in person, would you mind sharing more and I can replicate through the microphone?
Yeah, I think because our facility is on site, it's hard to find someone for just and the folks that do work full time in the building and have a lot of, I don't want to call it housekeeping, but more like stuff that has to get done. And that we all used to share, and now it's just a subset. So that isn't balanced correctly.
That's a very good point. And can you tell me your name and where you're from?
Yeah, my name is Cass Quennell.
Okay, this is Cass Quennell from the University of Wyoming. Made a really good point that at their institution, they have a lot of staff who are on site, but librarians who are not necessarily on site. And so when the sort of just in time tasks and things come up, there's a bit of an imbalance in who ends up taking care of them because more staff are on site and the people who aren't on site are, you know, not, perhaps not having to do as much of those just in time tasks. Connection to the, oh, if I click on it, it pops up like that. That's interesting. Connection to the larger community outside of libraries, that's also really, really good point. And I will say that that is a challenge no matter where you are, but it is exponentially more challenging at a large institution like UF. I have been at UF for 2.5 years, and I still think that there are people who work for the library system who I am not sure who they are, and I've probably never met them. Yeah. These are such excellent points. Okay, so what changes have others made or observed to the hiring process at your institution or organization during the pandemic? This is where we get to learn from you all, and I take all of your wonderful ideas and implement them at my institution. For the folks who aren't here in person, there is incredibly soporific, tinkly, wonderful classical music playing out in the hall. And it's cold outside and it's lulling us all into a very cozy feeling here.
There was a question in the chat that got you guys do any virtual tours of workspaces while you're interviewing?
So Brittany Kester at UF asks, so oh no, wait, no, sorry, someone in the chat asked this question. Rebecca Blankston asked an excellent question in the chat. Thank you for Brittany for conveying this. The question is, have we provided any virtual tours of our space when conducting virtual interviews? Jason, did you mention that you had done something like this?
Yes, I have, and I apologize for overlooking that question. So thank you, Brittany, for bringing that one back up. We have done virtual tours, and so I mean, I have certainly done informal tours of our spaces, even from the all candidates who interview. I think it's incredibly important that you have an idea, despite coming on board remotely, it's really important to have an idea of how you are connecting to that library space. We do spend a lot of time in this space, so I think it's incredibly important to have a fixed location, like on campus and kind of on that campus map. And so in the libraries themselves, also, we've done a series once every 6 months, where the whole of the libraries, we have a libraries orientation, and for the past two in this series, they've been entirely virtual, and so we've both had folks participate on that, and we've certainly solicited a lot of their feedback on that as well. If for no other reason, then we can tweak our component of that orientation for the betterment of other folks who are coming on board in the libraries. So yes, and again, thank you for bringing that question back up. I apologize for overlooking that one.
You use your phone. How do you do virtual tour?
So Jason, how did you do that? Did you use your phone?
I sure did. So I had Teams on my phone, and I was making very good use of the front and rear camera. Yeah, it's it was it's obviously incredibly informal, but yeah, again, I think it's just so important to have to impress upon someone some sense of connection, despite there not being people, but knowing that those people occupy space, and knowing that when you meet them, that you can relate to them in that space. There's something psychological or I don't know. There's something kind of comforting about knowing that despite folks working remotely, that we're kind of all connected in person, and kind of hint at this kind of that human connectedness that we're trying to impress in this virtual environment.
Heckathorn, future filmmaker. So you heard it here first.
No, but there's a follow-up question. Was there a way to smooth the video? I don't know that there was a technical way. I do know that I certainly, and I'm being forced to kind of like reflect on this in the moment, but there certainly was no. It was not herky jerky. Yeah, it was very slow.
It wasn't like a virtual roller coaster experience, right?
No. It was very it was very slow and intentional.
Well, I have we're getting close to time here, but I'm very keen. If none of the other questions would have worked, this is the one that I would have wanted to pose to everyone. How do you think hiring and onboarding of library employees will be permanently affected by the pandemic? I said library employees, but if there are vendors or publishers or non-library folks on the call, I'm interested in your perspectives, of course, as well. And as people are responding, I can share my thoughts on this, because we've already seen how some of our procedures and processes have been affected and will probably be permanently affected. And one of the things that it's so hard to tell if this is going to change or not, because it's very quickly become ingrained in us, is this sense of a larger sphere of personal space. So whereas in the past, where we may have crowded 30 people into a conference room and we're all sitting an inch from each other around a table in an interview, I don't know that we are ever going to go back to that. This might just be some sort of a behavioral paradigm shift in humanity, but I might be totally wrong on this. But my guess is that we really are rethinking space. I think the other thing that is changing for us is we are rethinking how we chunk out groups of people for interviews. So this may be that long gone are the days of a huge interview room with dozens of people all asking questions over an hour. It seems far more likely that we will chunk that out into smaller groups and have sort of smaller mini interview sessions. So, all right, I hope there will be a Zoom option given to those who request it. I would hope so too. We're not really seeing that so much at our institution. More Zoom meetings, whether staying with virtual interviews. Interesting. Okay, so some people, it looks like they are considering staying with the virtual interview over the on-site. More flexibility, more onboarding documentation, definitely. I think we have really learned that is invaluable. More flexible options, yep. Accessibility features, that's a great point. Yes.
Erin, if I could add two things to the conversation there. So there was one comment about the previous question about having diversity and inclusion committee review the job posting language before posting. Incredibly important. I should say that we have a wonderful DEI librarian, Twana Hodge, who very much participates in that process as well. And so we are fortunate to have her involvement with that. And then the other thing I want to add about this that kind of harkens back to the question about the hybrid, because it does relate to this question, the idea of these hybrid meetings. I think we can largely agree that it was by oversight or by blind spot. Any sort of hybrid meeting that we had prior to remote work in the pandemic, at least to me, always felt like the virtual component was very much an add-on. And that meetings were very much geared towards those who were in person. So, very much kind of like an add-on. But that any of our hybrid meetings now, we are so intentional about making sure that there's kind of equal participation. So that's something, if I were to have Menti up, that's something I would add to this conversation is this idea of making sure that we have the same level of participation, regardless of whether or not you're in the room. So it's really important.
It really is. It's something we're going to be very conscious of moving forward. I think the name of the game here is flexibility. People want flexibility. We want options. We don't want to just go back to the way that things were because we decided that we're sick of Zoom. So I really appreciate the fact that this did turn into a lively discussion, and thank you for rolling with the technological hiccups at the beginning. I knew there was going to be something, so but I think we weathered it fairly well. So we are over time, but thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Jason, for holding things down in Gville, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your conference.